Hi, my name is Paris, and I'm going to walk you through the exact system that I use to cut through decision fatigue and align execution with strategy. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how I developed this system, and then I'm going to show you a couple of examples applying it. And lastly, I'm going to show you the updated, simple system that I'm using today and how you can use it too. So with that, let's jump in. So the background of this, in 2024, I consulted as the head of ops for a tech startup. And I noticed that even though we had amazing ideas, we weren't actually moving the needle forward in a meaningful way. And so we knew what we wanted to accomplish, but we weren't following a standardized blueprint to actually get there. And so the key constraint ended up being that we had specialized talent, amazing ideas for meeting our goals, but no clarity on what success meant at any given time. And so the reason that we kept landing back at square one is because of the simple fact that there's more than one way to milk a cow. So literally having too many options is what leads to decision fatigue. So say for instance, you had a specific goal of gaining 25% more newsletter revenue in Q3. So technically, once you're actually going through this process of trying to figure out how you're going to meet this goal, that's when you start to notice that there's several ways of actually accomplishing this. And then this is where founders or small teams actually start to get overwhelmed with all the options they have to choose from, and they're not able to make a clear decision. So it may seem like simple indecision on the surface, but what it really led to was that everything and then nothing was becoming a priority, and then burnout from consistently chasing the changing item on the top of the list. And so what we really lacked in this case was a method of reasoning that could help us trim the fat on all of our ideas and start to move forward with what we actually needed. So a very specific example of this is like, say for instance, you have a team, or for some of you, it's just going to be that you're an individual and you have a specific goal. Say for instance, in this case, you simply just want to make some extra cash. You just want to make some extra money. And so then you come up with this list of ideas that you think could help get you there. And so this is where we have to give ourselves some grace, because obviously if you come up with this list of ideas, you can more than likely justify in your mind how and why these would get you towards your goals. So say for instance, in this case, you just want to have like more sales. You may go about this and say, we want to get more followers on our social media, because we can justify in our minds that more followers can be turned into more customers. So then you check it off the list. Say for instance, you want to have more newsletter signups, because you can justify that having more owned audiences is going to be able to get you in front of them, able to communicate, and then get you more sales. You could do the same thing for text. Maybe you want to launch a landing page. Maybe you want to run ads to a specific landing. All of these things can be justified for your goal. But obviously, we all know that all of these things are not equally yoked. Each of these items are not necessarily going to, for instance, take into consideration all of the resources that it actually takes to abide by all of these ideas. Or you likely haven't taken into account your own or your team's capacity to actually do this stuff. So this is where you would need a method of reasoning to start to look at all of your ideas and then figure out which ones are best suited towards your resources, your capacity, and what just generally makes sense for where you are at in the business. So then I started really thinking about this, right? And my main thing was I really wanted to map our projects in a way where we could still maintain that lean and fast startup environment. And so I started thinking about some of our common concerns, different things that kept coming up in our team meetings and such. I thought about our goals, and then a recent list of ideas that we had for an upcoming campaign. And so I then created essentially a priority matrix to build around what our method of reasoning was going to be. And so when actually approaching building out that method of reasoning, there were two parts to this. First was defining that criteria of focus. And so in our case, as a startup, I really wanted to just focus on time, money, and impact. How long is it going to take? How much money is it going to cost us? And what our impact was going to be? How close was it going to get us to our actual goals? And then the next thing that I wanted to account for was the judgment of criteria against each other. And so basically what that means is, if you can notice here, if you just tell me how long something takes, how much money it costs, and the impact, well, that's great. But on its own, all it's really doing is giving me more information about the idea. It's not actually helping me make a decision on which one should be ranked in priority. And so what you need is a judgment of criteria against each other. You need to be able to tell me which one of these things is going to be most important when actually narrowing down your list. So for us, I really wanted impact to be at the top of the list, because in my mind, I'm thinking, why would anything be on our project board that isn't actually getting us towards our goals? What is the point of that at our stage of business? And then the next thing that I wanted to account for was money, because even though we were funded, we still had to adhere to this little thing called runway. And then time I put at the bottom because, again, if something was very high impact or didn't cost a lot of money, the time really didn't matter because we could break that down into iterative chunks and still be working towards that as we went along. And so then it was time to put this to the test. So again, I gave this to the marketing team to use on a current campaign that they were actually working on. And the key to this exercise was to get them to do it separately. And the reason that I wanted them to do something like this separately is because it's not often that yourself or your team just doesn't know how to prioritize at all. It's that there's a specific mindset around how you would naturally apply criteria or rank things in a particular lens, just depending on how you're thinking about them. And so I knew that by getting them to do this separately, I could get them to basically expose how they were going about prioritizing, and then we could actually bring everyone together and start to fill in those gaps. The results actually ended up being that we had 90% alignment on how some of these ideas should be ranked, which is really cool because, again, when you're in this stage, you really want to be able to close the gaps around how you specifically in your business, for the stage of where you are, for the resources that you have, again, with your strategic alignment, you want to make sure that you're making decisions or you're designing a method of reasoning that's going to keep everyone aligned on where you're going. We wanted to have our criteria be ranked by impact, money, and time, but someone else, money may not be a factor, so that may be at the bottom of their list, and time is of the essence, so they want to run really fast and just kind of like test a whole bunch of things and break them and keep going. And so that's not necessarily where we were. And so what we left with also was real campaign strategic alignment. We actually left with a list, narrowed down ideas and activities that the team can now go run with and actually be able to start on. And so y'all, I was actually kind of nervous to put this in front of them originally because I knew that it was asking them to do one more thing before they could actually get into the work. But it actually really was very useful because it didn't waste the team's time chasing after things that didn't actually matter, and we could actually have a relevant to-do list and not be so overwhelmed. So it was actually a very positive reaction, and they found it just as easy to use as myself. And so using this myself, actually in Q3, I launched a coffee brand, Public Proof Coffee. And naturally, when you're at the start of a business, this is when you have the most ideas. Your mind is literally wide open on all the possibilities. And this is exactly when you need a specific way, a priority matrix, a method of reasoning to be able to narrow down some ideas so that you can actually move forward and progress quickly. Actually, after documenting some of my own goals, I ended up using this on myself. So I literally jotted down my goals: sell 100 bags, generate sales across 3 channels. My main goal really for Q4 was to launch the end of the year campaign, which kind of encompassed some of these other goals. And then I just had to list out my ideas. And then in the next tab here, what I did was essentially I went through all the criteria, and then I essentially just ranked each of these ideas against each other, and then off to the side here is where I actually gave them a priority for like 1, 2, or 3. And I actually want to point out here on the side and kind of like revisit the idea that this type of system and how you build this out really does need to be aligned strategically, meaning it needs to take into account your unique position and kind of like where you are as a business, what stage you're at, what resources you have, team that you have. You really do need to take into account multiple things when designing this. For me, I was bootstrapped and just kind of like putting my own money into this project. And so for me, even like when I look at costs required, if you can kind of see the rubric here, is only up to like $25,000. And I'm looking at the low end below $1,000. And of course, another company could look like their top line being like in the millions. So I say all that to say that this really can be designed specifically for you and not just a very general type of thing that you have to follow. So if you would like help with that, I'll have links down below. Now I've updated this concept even further. In this, I now have a whole guide that I basically created around this very topic in more detail that actually walks you through doing this for yourself, kind of following the guidelines that I've placed in here. So it kind of just gives some background, it gets your vision, some goals, and then even KPIs and some key actions. And then it goes on and actually walks you through ranking your specific ideas through this formula that will be linked down below. So the current method that I'm using, it pretty much looks like this simple system. So you still consider what your goals are, right? And I do recommend kind of like using an input like the SMART method, but whether you use this or not, I just recommend that your goals at least do be measurable for this to actually work. And so when you have your goals situated, then you can kind of brain dump and come up with that list again of those relevant ideas, those ones that you can justify that obviously make sense to get towards your goals. And then you're going to start to develop the method of reasoning. This is really where your ideas start to get scrutinized against each other between time, resources, about at risk, and impact. And then, of course, these are going to give you then your aligned tasks, those ones that actually make sense, the ones that you should actually run with right now. And then this, of course, is going to get us to our beloved strategic output. This is where everyone wants to actually be producing, to actually be productive, to actually be meeting your goals. So in order to get your strategic output, you have to have your aligned tasks. And in order to get your aligned task, you would have need to narrow them down, put them through some sort of method of reasoning, some sort of priority matrix. And then of course, those come from your brain dump of ideas that are tied to your strategic goals. And so the way that this method is going to be effective is if you have your goals dialed in. So with that, I want to take this a step further. As you can probably see by just looking at this very simple system, there's intuitively a couple things that are missing that actually happen in some of the more narrow places here. Now, what's missing over here is the clarity of your actual direction. This is alignment on your strategic goals, having a vision and being clear on where you're actually going. And over here, what's missing is what I would call your systems cluster. These are your processes, your team, the different feedback loops that are going to help enable growth. And this systems cluster is essentially going to determine how well and efficiently you're going to get to your strategic output. And so now, obviously, these are completely other topics in and of themselves, but I just wanted to give you a sneak peek of how this like very simple system here starts to feed into other subsystems that you have in your business so that you can make sure that everything that you're working on is aligned from end to end. And if you've made it this far in the video, you should know that I currently help my clients with all three areas of the system, both getting clarity on the direction, figuring out that specific method of reasoning for their stage of business, and then also helping audit and connect them to better systems so that they can get to that strategic output. And I hope that you enjoyed this video. This is my first one in a while. If you did like it, give this video a thumbs up. Please subscribe for more videos just like this one, and let me know if you want me to dive even further into either of those other topics or anything else that you can think of. Thanks. Bye.